And so I really wanted to bring up this concern with you guys. It was definitely a stress I had never felt before. It's extremely competitive. The amount of work and the amount of stress that you're gonna feel while you're doing one of these programs, it's no joke. And so just know that it is kind of cutthroat, but it's definitely worth it in the end. By doing a special master's program, you increase your chances to in between 60 to 80%. What's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel and welcome to today's video. And by popular request, today's video is going to be all about special master's programs. And I know I've talked about special master's programs a lot in the past. And in today's video, I want to cover kind of the reality of doing a special master's program, because I have mentioned that it does help you get into medical school, but it's definitely not something easy to do. And so I wanted to make a video just kind of going over some of the more truthful things about special master's programs. And so before we get into that, if this is the first time we're meeting, my name is Michael. I'm a first-year medical student. I'm actually wrapping up my first semester of medical school right now. But last year, I did a special master's program at the medical school that I'm currently attending. And I would be lying if I told you guys I would be in medical school without having done a special master's program. And so if you guys are in the same situation or the same boat that I was in about a year or two ago, definitely check out this video. It'll help motivate you guys and find some more guidance on what you should do. Also, I do have a Facebook page where I help out pre-med students if you guys have a low GPA or a low MCAT, or if you just simply are a little lost in your journey, come shoot me a message on Facebook and we can definitely get you back on track to getting into medical school. So the first thing I want to talk to you guys about is the intensity that goes along with doing a special master's program. I think it's super important to realize that you guys are going to be getting a master's degree upon completion of your program. I know a lot of you guys, if not all of you guys, are planning on going to medical school after the special master's program, which is probably why you're in the program to begin with. And so a lot of the pre-med students that I talk with, I always tell them to treat a special master's program as 5 years of medical school. And so what I mean by that is medical school is 4 years, but by doing a special master's program, it's gonna kind of feel like 5 years of medical school. A special master's program is going to be intense. It's gonna be much more difficult than undergrad, and it's gonna require a lot of time and dedication. You know, now that I'm in medical school, I can kind of compare the master's program that I did with medical school, and it's really hard to distinguish which one was tougher. When I was in my special master's program, we studied for about 6 weeks. We had 5 separate classes and basically 5 different instructors teaching those classes. And then after 6 weeks, we would have 5 different exams throughout the span of an entire week. So we would have 1 exam for every day of the week for an entire week. And so fast forwarding to now that I'm in medical school, it's completely different because we have basically 1 class because it's systems based. And if you guys want to learn more about what you learn in medical school, click on this video because I think you'll find it extremely helpful on discerning how special master's programs and medical school differ. But now that I'm in medical school, we basically just have 1 class, and it's kind of weird to think of it as 1 class because it's a block system. So that 1 class kind of consists of all of the different subjects and topics that you can learn. And so let me just give you guys a quick example. So our first block was called Scientific Foundations of Medicine. And within that course, we learned biochemistry, immunology, histology, embryology, and it was all just mixed together. So we weren't learning all of anatomy. We weren't learning all of physiology. It was basically bits and pieces of different topics that relate to the system that we're studying. And so generally we'll have 2 to 3 weeks of material, and then we'll be tested on that material. And then we'll do another 2 to 3 weeks of material and then be tested on that material. And generally within a block, which is about 6 weeks, we'll have 2 exams, maybe 3 exams. And so that's just kind of a quick difference between a special master's program and medical school. But you can kind of see that in that 6-week span, either in the master's or in medical school, you're essentially learning the same amount of information. You're just being tested on it in different ways. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is doing a special master's program for a year is essentially like doing an extra year of medical school. So now I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about the financial end of things. Special master's programs are fairly expensive. They're a little less than medical school. So my special master's program for tuition was about $35,000 for 1 year. Now that I'm in medical school, 1 year of tuition is about $49,000. And I know that varies from school to school, but that can kind of give you guys a rough estimate on what you can expect if you do choose to do a special master's program. The reason I want to bring up finances is because that is a critical concern that you should have when making the decision to do or not do a special master's program. Now, before I talk more about finances, let it be clear that your chances of getting into medical school by doing one of these special master's programs goes up significantly. And so I did a video on how normal students, coming from undergrad, they have about a 6 to 7% chance of getting into any given medical school. By doing a special master's program, you increase your chances to in between 60 to 80%. And so now that you know those statistics, it's important to understand that a big reward like getting accepted into medical school also comes with a big risk, which is the financial end of a special master's program. If you guys aren't familiar with student loans and how they work, it's not super important right now. Just know that most students, if not all of us, will take out student loans, whether it be for medical school or a special master's program. Those student loans have interest, and usually with student loans, you have 6 months after you graduate to then begin to start paying those loans back. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because you have to keep in mind, what if I don't get into medical school after my special master's program? What am I going to do with those loans? Because if you're accepted into medical school, your loans get deferred, which means you don't have to pay them off because you're continuing in your education. And as a full-time student, you're not required to pay your loans off until you graduate. And so you don't have to pay your loans for the special master's program or medical school until you graduate, and then you have 6 months before you have to start paying them off. And so I guess my question to you guys is, if you don't get into medical school after a special master's program, are you guys prepared to be able to start paying those loans off? Now, I'm not like a loan officer. I don't know a ton about this process or student loans, after you graduate. And so hopefully there's some sort of deferment or program or whatever out there that will help you guys be able to not have to pay loans, and hopefully you can get into medical school the following year. Because if there's no loophole like that, then you're going to actually have to pay 6 months of student loans back until you get into medical school, hopefully the following year. And so I know when I was going through the master's program, I always had that in the back of my head, like, what if I don't get into medical school this year? I'm gonna have to start paying these loans off, but I don't even have a job, because the special master's program is your job. It takes all of your time. Just like when you're in medical school, you don't have time to work. And so I really wanted to bring up this concern with you guys, because I do talk about how amazing and helpful special master's programs are, but they do come with some risk. All right, so another thing that you guys really should be aware of when deciding on doing a special master's program is the possibility of not doing well in the program. And I'm sorry that I'm sounding a little negative right now. I do understand that, but it's super important to look at both sides of your situation. You have the possibility of getting into medical school, and you have the possibility of not getting into medical school. And so it's kind of the side people don't really want to talk about. Obviously, it's not easy, but there are a lot of students that end up falling into the category of not getting into medical school upon completion of a special master's program. And so let's say that you don't do well in the special master's program, which ultimately results in you not going to medical school. And so I think in order to look at our options, we need to step back and look at why we did a special master's program and what was the purpose of it. And so for most students that are doing a special master's program, they either have a low MCAT, or like most students, they'll probably have a low GPA, and specifically a low science GPA. That was definitely me, but thankfully I did well in my program and was able to get into medical school. But I know for, about 40 to 50% of the students, that's not the case. And obviously they all have their different outcomes and their different reasons why they didn't get into medical school. It's not ultimately because they failed, during their special master's program. But for the ones that don't do well in the special master's program, basically what I would advise is apply to a Caribbean school, because at this point, you weren't able to get into medical school with your undergraduate grades. Now you aren't able to get into medical school with a graduate level GPA. And so that really only leaves you with one option if you want to become a physician, and that's to go to a Caribbean medical school. Now, I don't know why I'm saying this like it's a negative thing, because there's people that don't even do the master's program route and they go directly to Caribbean because that's just kind of the choice they want. They want to go to the Caribbean. I mean, who wouldn't want to go and study on a beach, honestly? I mean, you wonder why it's so difficult to get into a medical school on like the West Coast or the East Coast, like right next to the ocean. It's because it's the location. And I know that's not the only reason. Obviously prestige and all of that stuff come into play. But if you guys are worried about a Caribbean school, I highly recommend watching Dr. Buck, which if you're a pre-med student or a medical student, you've probably heard of him. You probably already follow him. He's a physician. He's a surgeon in Utah, a general surgeon. He did the Caribbean route and he is doing perfectly fine. And so if you don't do well in a special master's program, there's really, unfortunately, no way of coming back from that. And so your best bet is to do a Caribbean medical school. There's about 5 or 6 now that are pretty credible. And so I'd highly recommend seeking those schools out. Off the top of my head, some really good ones are St. George. That's probably the top one that I would recommend. There's also Ross University, and then there's also like the University of Antigua or of the Caribbean. I think those are 2 different ones, but it's something like that. And so I guess there is a silver lining. Like if you don't end up doing well in the master's program, you still have an opportunity to become a physician. It just won't be the easiest route, but as long as your goal is to become a physician, you should be willing to do whatever it takes to make that dream come true. Now, I want to talk about something that I've noticed not only while I was doing the special master's program, but now that I know a few students that are in this year's program, it's still the same outcome. So I really wanted to talk about this, and it's kind of like the cutthroatness of a special master's program, because everyone is trying to get into medical school. They're all trying to get straight A's if possible during this master's program. So it's extremely, extremely competitive once you're in the program. It's not competitive in the sense of being accepted into a program. You really don't need anything spectacular with regards to GPA and MCAT. In fact, you really don't need a good MCAT or a good GPA. So anything, below a 3.0 is perfectly fine. I had a 2.7 when I applied, and my MCAT was a 491 when I applied. So if your numbers are around there or even below that, you can definitely apply and be accepted. So don't let that stop you from doing a special master's program. And so when I was doing my special master's program, everybody wanted to be like friends and buddy, during the first, probably 2/3 of the first semester. And then things got real, because in order to get a med school interview, you had to get a 3.6 or higher your first semester. And so everyone was gunning to get that 3.6 or higher. And so at the end of the first semester, we all kind of knew, where you stood. If you had the 3.6, you could kind of breathe and you kind of knew you were going to get an interview invite. And I guess fast forward to the second semester of the master's program, and people weren't as friendly anymore, because people were getting interviews, not only to the medical school we were at, but to other medical schools as well. And so at that point, you knew people, you knew your class, You knew what people were capable of. You knew which people kind of annoyed you, which people you wouldn't want to have medical school with. And so yeah, the tension just kind of started building from day one of the second semester. And then ultimately, you got your interview invite, and then you saw basically everyone that got an interview invite at the interview because you guys all interviewed together. And then at this point, you knew you were only competing with the people that were in that room with you, the people that got interviews at the medical school where your special master's program was at. You're now only competing with them. The rest of the class, basically, they were not getting in. They probably had a good shot for getting in next year, but their chances kind of were gone. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's kind of true. Not to say it wasn't possible that they got a late interview or something like that, but that's beside the point. So now you're competing with the people that got interview invites. You can kind of see the different people that are in the room, and ultimately you start making judgments in your head, and you're like, well, I'm better than them. They're a little bit smarter than me, but I have a better this and that, or wow, that person, they're great, or wow, I wasn't expecting that person to get an invite. And so these things, they just kind of start popping into your head, and you just have to kind of take a step back and just realize that this is it. This is your opportunity. You have to seize it. You have to take it away from one of these other people. And that's kind of when things really got real. I feel like friendships kind of went out the window at that point. It's sad to say, but it's kind of the truth. Not for everyone, of course, but definitely everyone was there for themselves. Obviously, you want to get into medical school. And I feel like the difference between first semester and second semester was first semester, you're leaning on each other. You're trying to help each other out to do as best as you can. And ultimately, you're trying to help yourself out by collaborating with other classmates. But after you meet that minimum GPA, after you get that med school interview, you kind of don't need those people anymore. If you weren't really connecting like on a friend level in the first place, you just kind of were like using each other for like quizzes and studying and stuff like that, which is perfectly fine. You don't have to be friends with everyone. And so just know that it is kind of cutthroat, and that's kind of the side that people don't really talk about. And that's something that I kind of had to learn the hard way as well. So just make sure if you are going to do a special master's program, just keep an eye out for yourself. Definitely be friendly and definitely help each other out, because ultimately that's going to help you out, and you just want to get into medical school. And you should be happy for anybody else that gets into medical school as well, because they're in that same boat as you, and everybody wants to become a physician. So I guess to end this video, I want to just mention that doing a special master's program is one of the best chances you'll have at getting into medical school. I guess one last thing that I want to leave you guys with is the amount of work and the amount of stress that you're gonna feel while you're doing one of these programs. It's no joke. It's like a year of medical school. And so you can get depressed. It can feel lonely. You can feel like you're not smart enough or good enough to be a doctor. But I think the real big thing is the amount of stress that you guys are gonna feel. Not only with just the amount of material coming at you, but it's also stressful to know that you have to do well in order to be invited for a medical school interview. And so that can be extremely stressful. I know it was for me that first semester, knowing this is my shot. This is basically my last chance unless I'm going to do a Caribbean school. I have to do my best. I have to get A's, maybe some B's here and there, And so it's just a different amount of stress that you guys are used to feeling. And it can be extremely, extremely overwhelming, especially second semester. If you guys haven't seen some of my other videos I did on special master's programs, I go more into detail about my own personal experience with it. But basically, just a quick recap. I was invited for a med school interview. I thought I did extremely well. Ultimately, I was put on the wait list, and I was still, doing the program. This was probably in April. And I still had 2 exams coming up. And at this point in the master's program, if it was to end right there, I wouldn't have been able to be accepted because I wasn't meeting the minimum GPA. And so it came down to my last 2 exam weeks. And so I eventually found out that I was accepted, but I still had one more exam week and I still wasn't meeting the minimum GPA. And so everything came down to my final exam week on whether I was going to be able to keep my acceptance or not be eligible for medical school. And so you guys can only imagine, like, this entire year comes down to this one exam week, and all of that stress just came straight down on my shoulders. It was definitely a stress I had never felt before, and I knew I just had to crush that exam week because I was going to medical school and there was nothing that was going to stop me. And so I just want you guys to be prepared for that type of stress. It's going to be intense, but it's definitely worth it in the end if you guys can come out on top, for sure. So if you guys have any questions on special master's programs, on medical school, on pre-med classes, or whatever you guys want to talk about, either drop them down in the comments, or if it's more of a personal matter and you guys need help with your own personal journey to medical school, check out my Facebook page. It's called Med School Mentor. We do like personal statement editing. We do advising one-on-one with me. I'll also do like mock interviews with you guys or talk to you guys about, Caribbean options or DO schools. I am a DO medical student, but I do have friends that are MD medical students, so I can kind of tell you guys the pros and cons of each and kind of the differences, which honestly, there's not a huge difference. And you guys can watch the video I just made. It's called like Everything You Learn in Your First Semester of Medical School. And I kind of talk about the differences between MD students and DO students. So if you guys are interested in that, go check out that video. I'll put the link in the description as well. And if you guys haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and I will see you guys in my next video.